Killer designs in Dead by Daylight have gotten quite intricate as time has gone on. We used to have extremely simplistic designs, but many of the new killers attempt to break that mold and introduce a completely unique mechanic to the game. We used to have designs as simple as dude with chainsaw and dude with bear traps. Now we've got killers that phase in and out of existence, killers that send you to the gulag, and killers that are in two places at once. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but in a lot of ways I can't help but feel nostalgic for some of the older killers. Many people associate simple with boring, but I think that it can often be quite the opposite. Sometimes keeping things simple is a good thing, and I see no better example of that than DBD's Huntress. My first two retrospectives were over killers that I'm not extremely fond of, so I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a killer that I really enjoy playing as and against. I think a perfect example of this is the Huntress. She was Dead by Daylight's 8th killer, introduced to the game in July of 2017. Huntress was the last killer to be released for free, which is honestly a testament to just how much DLC this game has now. I think a lot of people forget just how long the Huntress has been a part of this game. She joined the fray back when double pallets and pallet vacuum existed, during a time where Behavior couldn't quite figure out how to make even remotely balanced add-ons. More on that later. Anyway, ever since the game's inception, people asked the question, when are we getting a range killer? It took a bit of time, but Behavior finally delivered, and what they presented is something quite special. I'd take this time to explain how the Huntress works, but I think that just about anybody can pretty quickly pick up on how this killer functions. Just take a look at her power description. She throws hatchets and reloads hatchets at lockers. That's about it. This is kind of what I meant when I was talking about simplistic designs earlier. Seriously, compare this power description to that of, say, the Twins. I think this is part of the beauty of Huntress though. Her power might be extremely simple in function, but there's so much to learn and master as you begin to understand this killer more. She can be simple to pick up if you're playing against newer players, but experienced survivors will test everything you've learned as this killer, both mechanically and intellectually. I'll touch on gameplay more later, but next up I want to take a deeper look at the Huntress herself, known in another life as Ana. The Huntress came from a very simple background before being taken by the entity. She lived in the forest with her mother where she learned to hunt, but Ana's mother was killed when she attempted to protect Ana from a wild elk. Ana learned to live on her own, becoming an increasingly skilled hunter as time went on. She eventually hunted bigger beasts, including humans. For the time it came out, I think Huntress's backstory was actually really well thought out. It does a great job of introducing us to who this person is, while also feeling like a natural progression towards her power in the game. Some other amazing aesthetic details make it into the game through this story, such as Ana's iconic lullaby. I'd be doing the designers of Huntress a disservice by not talking about her lullaby. In her backstory, Ana's mother sings her a Russian lullaby with her last breaths in an attempt to calm Ana down after the elk attack. This now legendary lullaby makes its way into Huntress's gameplay, and it's actually a key part of her overall balance. If you've never heard the Huntress's lullaby, I'm going to play a short snippet of it here because it truly is something special. Chills every single time. No matter how many times I've heard it in-game, I still get a little nervous when I hear that iconic lullaby. Most people know that Myers was the first killer to get a unique terror radius and chase theme, but in a lot of ways, I consider Huntress to be the second one. Her chase theme and terror radius might be the default ones, but her chilling lullaby really helps matches against her stand out. So in a strange way, I feel like she was one of the first to receive this unique treatment, besides Myers. You want to know something really badass? In the Huntress's archive story, it's revealed that she intentionally sings her lullaby to incite fear and confusion in her enemies. Check out this small excerpt. Ana toys with them. She's outnumbered and she knows it. She weakens their senses by depriving them of sleep. Every night she approaches their camp, sings a lullaby, then howls like a bodark. The soldiers wake in a frenzy and scuttle in terror as she returns to her cabin to sleep with her little one. She rests for a few hours, then returns to her little war to reignite a cycle of terror. 1 or 2 sleepless nights and they'll be ripping each other apart. I could probably make an entire video on this topic alone, but it always confuses me whenever people describe the Huntress's mind as that of a child. I think a better way to describe her would be simple, or even ignorant. Ana has lived in the forest her whole life, so she doesn't fully understand the inner workings of human society. Despite this, Ana's training from her mother has made her into a deadly force. She thinks tactically, as though every single move is calculated several turns in advance. This level of calculation, either intentionally or by coincidence, relates extremely well to the Huntress's gameplay in-game. Let's talk a bit about that. I touched on it only slightly earlier, but I really do think Huntress is one of the most well-rounded and well-designed killers out of the entire cast. She is far from easy to master, but simple enough that a newer killer can pick her up and probably do alright if they're facing survivors of equal skill level. I think it's such a great design because you can play Huntress in a really straightforward, direct way and still see a lot of success. But there's also plenty of room to pop off and go for crazy trick shots if you feel like it. Check out this clip from Coconut RTS. I think it's a perfect representation of the depth of Huntress.
Oh! Oh! Yo, I never knew that was a thing.
Even someone as experienced as him is learning new things as this killer, which says quite a lot. Playing against Huntress can often be a complete landslide victory, or a crushing defeat depending on the skill level of the person playing as Huntress. I like to compare her to Nurse or Blight, since they are also killers that take a pretty large amount of skill to master. Playing against these high skill killers can make for some really strange matches as Survivor. A bad Huntress can often feel like a complete pushover, while an experienced one is a terrifying sight to behold. Seriously, good Huntress players are straight up freaky. If somebody plays Huntress, they really play Huntress. These players have spent hundreds or even thousands of hours playing this killer, and they know how to play her forwards, backwards, and sideways. They probably played Quake for thousands of hours before settling into Dead by Daylight. Good Huntress players really challenge your very understanding of the game as a Survivor, hitting you from unexpected angles and from incredibly far away. Despite all of this, Huntress is still an extremely beatable killer, even if the person playing her is really good. I think this is one of the main reasons Huntress is so balanced. Her upsides are extremely powerful, but her downsides are certainly present as well. She moves at 110%, which is slightly slower than what many consider to be the standard 115% movement speed. She shares this trait with a few other killers, and for good reason. 110 killers have really strong powers, and Huntress is no exception. One of Huntress's other downsides is that she has a pretty fair wind-up time before being able to throw a hatchet, while also having a decently long cooldown if she decides to lower that hatchet without throwing it. If you've watched my Deathslinger video, you'll know that Deathslinger completely disregards this intentional balance decision, instead being able to instantly shoot and having no real penalty for faking a shot. It's fascinating to me that Behavior screwed up this range killer balance on a character that came out way after Huntress did. Most people would say that Huntress is stronger than Deathslinger, but alongside being stronger, she also manages to be much more fair to play against. Huntress has clear-cut counterplay, with a lot of her actions taking a bit of time and having distinct, noticeable animations. Deathslinger is the opposite of this, being able to instantly commit to an action without really leaving a survivor any time to react, which is why I think she is far, far more loved than Deathslinger is. It's kind of impossible to talk about Huntress without discussing the hilarious history of her add-ons. Disclaimer before I get started here, Behavior has confirmed that Huntress is receiving an add-on pass in the near future. This means that many of her current add-ons could be reworked or entirely removed. With that being said, Huntress has quite the history with her add-ons. I think we should get started with what is probably one of, if not the single most infamous add-ons in the whole game, Iridescent Head. I spent the last few minutes raving over Huntress's awesome design, but this single add-on has ruined countless Huntress matches. Iridescent Head makes her hatchets down in one shot, with the downside that you only have one hatchet total. This can be increased to 3 total hatchets with the Infantry Belt add-on. Do I really even need to explain why this one is broken? Iridescent Head is an absolutely ridiculous add-on, and a prime example of poor add-on design that was commonplace in the earlier days of DBD. I would be shocked if this one isn't changed in the upcoming add-on pass for Huntress. I think another add-on worth talking about in this section is the Barris Toxin. This is another case of old add-on design, in which literally every killer had to have an exhaustion add-on. Hitting survivors with hatchets is kind of your whole game plan, so having an add-on that completely negates exhaustion perks just by simply using your power is a little absurd, to put it lightly. Oh, and it's a common add-on, so you can easily stock up hundreds of them. Yet again, I think this one will probably get changed soon. One last set of add-ons I want to talk about are these two, the Flower Babushka and the Mana Grass Braid. They both do the same thing. Your hatchets have a slightly lower windup time, with the Flower Babushka having slightly better values. I mentioned earlier that Huntress's windup time is incredibly fair for both sides. You might think that I'm going to say that I think these add-ons are broken, but I actually think quite the opposite. These windup time add-ons actually have really balanced values. They're noticeable, but not enough that they break the careful balancing of base kit Huntress. The reason I'm discussing them is because they have quite the dark history. If you're a little newer to DBD, you might not know this, but these add-ons used to have significantly higher values, creating what is now known as the infamous machine gun hatchet build. The windup time was absurdly fast, making Huntress able to throw her hatchets like a literal machine gun. Want to know another fun fact? Tinkerer used to function entirely differently as a perk, instead having the simple effect of boosting the strength of add-ons. When Tinkerer was combined with the machine gun hatchet build, it only boosted the effect of the build further, making it an absolute nightmare to face. I honestly think these add-ons alone are half the reason Tinkerer was changed. I want to next talk about what I like to call Huntress Oddities, a section dedicated to things that we've all probably experienced both as and against the Huntress. It's hard to not mention Huntress's hatchet hitboxes when talking about her. I wouldn't really call them unfair, but there are definitely times where some hits can feel pretty undeserved from the survivor's end, and even from the killer's perspective at times. I'm not entirely sure if this is an issue with Huntress herself, or if it's the fault of laggy connections. Even default killer lunges can feel unfair when the connection is finicky, so I wouldn't be super surprised if a laggy Huntress's hatchets were affected as well. I'm not going to act like I'm a professional on the subject, just throwing a bit of theory crafting out there. Weirdly enough, Deathslinger's projectile hitbox actually feels more fair, marking one of the only aspects of him that is better designed than Huntress in my opinion. I know that Dead by Daylight isn't exactly a game of precision, but there are definitely times when Huntress's hatchet hitboxes can feel a little off. Am I the only one that gets stage fright as Huntress? I don't really know what else to call it, but I often feel this sort of pressure to perform well when playing her. I think it causes me to miss extremely easy shots. Want to know another odd thing about Huntress? She has what is probably one of the hardest achievements in the game, requiring the player to down 20 survivors from over 24 meters away with a hatchet. You might be thinking, what, that's not extremely bad. But what if I told you that amount was increased to 100 downs on the console version of the game? I can't for the life of me fathom why they made the console version of this achievement harder, but yeah, that's a thing that exists. You know what else I find odd? So many inexperienced Huntress players wind up their hatchet at a pallet. Every single time. I understand that this tactic works wonders against inexperienced survivors, but I often play against Huntress players that literally wind up every time no matter what. In my mind, I expect them to change it up, and yet they keep doing it. Over and over. Am I the stupid one here? I love the Huntress. She is an icon of classic DBD, a time when killers had simple yet interesting and fun powers. Huntress has stood the test of time, being both a powerful killer in her own right, while also being interesting and dynamic to both the user and the opponent. She has a great backstory, backed up even further by a solid archives entry that expands even more on the character of Ana. She has a great base design, great cosmetics, and of course, her iconic lullaby. Mathieu Cote, otherwise known as the pretty good job so far guy, has gone on record saying that Huntress is his favorite original killer they've ever created. I think it says a lot when, even after all this time, the lead game director still says that this simple little killer from back in the day is his favorite. I think the Huntress is just about perfect, with the only thing in need of a change being her more egregious add-ons like Iridescent Head. I really hope that her upcoming add-on pass doesn't include an unnecessary change to her base power like they did with the Hillbilly. To end it off, what Huntress video would be complete without a small montage? I'll see you next time.